hanging tree, forest of the condemned. The forest stood beyond the town like a silent, brooding sentinel, its trees twisted and gnarled, their skeletal branches clawing at gray skies. Villagers whispered of it in fear, calling it the forest of the condemned. Beyond the edge of the last cultivated field, past the river that stank of rot and stagnant water, the ground darkened under a canopy so thick that sunlight never pierced its depths. And there the hanging tree waited. The tree was ancient, wider than any other in the forest, its bark blackened by centuries of storms and flame. Its limbs were vast, reaching outward like grasping arms, heavy ropes dangling from thick branches. Over the years, countless bodies had swung from its arms, their flesh rotting in the wind, their faces frozen in terror. Crows circled endlessly above, picking at eyes, gnawing at cheeks, and calling out as if mocking those who dared walk beneath its shadow. It was a place meant to terrify. The townsfolk never ventured into the forest without cause, and those who were condemned for murder, heresy, theft, or worse were dragged here with ropes around their wrists and mouths gagged against cries. They were paraded through the village as a warning, the fear in their eyes a lesson to all. The forest claimed all who defied the laws, and the hanging tree did not forgive. The path to the tree was lined with decay. Old bones poked through the soil like crooked teeth, animal corpses half-eaten by vermin. The smell of rot clung to the air, mingling with the damp scent of moss and wet bark. Every step brought a new horror. Rats scuttled between tangled roots, their fur matted with mud. Snakes slid silently over fallen leaves. The wind whispered like a chorus of the damned, carrying echoes of screams from decades past. Once, a thief had been caught stealing bread from the market. He had been dragged to the forest at dawn, his wrists bound and feet bleeding from the march. By noon, his body hung from a branch, his head tilted to one side, tongue protruding, flies already swarming. The villagers left offerings at the edge of the forest. Bread, coins, sometimes small toys, to appease the spirits of those who had died there. Mothers forbade children from venturing too close. Old men crossed themselves when the wind carried the faintest sound of rattling bones. It was not only criminals who found themselves at the hanging tree. Witches, heretics, and those accused of consorting with demons were brought here in chains, their fingers stiff from frost or fever. Priests would march behind, chanting prayers to drive the devil away, sprinkling holy water onto the roots, onto the bodies swinging in the wind. Sometimes it was said the condemned would cry out in tongues not their own, their screams carrying a strange, hollow resonance, the sound of a soul being torn from the body. The keepers of the forest were cruel men, armed with clubs and hooks, eyes as hard as the stones of the gallows. They took no pity, striking the condemned if they hesitated, dragging them by hair or rope. And once the bodies hung, the keepers would smear tar along the bark of the tree, a ritual to keep the spirits bound, the rope swinging like a pendulum above a graveyard of ghosts. Seasons passed, and the forest grew darker. In winter, snow covered the corpses, turning their limbs white against black bark, and the wind cut like a knife through frozen branches. In spring, the snow melted, revealing bloated bodies with skin torn by scavengers, their teeth gnawed, their bones splintered. Summers brought swarms of flies and gnats, and the smell of decay could be carried by the wind for miles. Even the bravest hunter dared not pass too close. The forest had a reputation for swallowing those who lingered too long. There were tales of men who entered seeking riches or revenge, only to vanish. Some said the hanging tree claimed them, their bodies swinging unseen in the undergrowth. Others whispered of spirits, pale figures with hollow eyes who roamed among the trunks, dragging the living into the shadows, whispering of justice and vengeance. their cold breath leaving frost on skin in midsummer. The forest floor was littered with remnants of the past. Shoes, tattered rags, rusted shackles, broken arrows, and skulls with teeth chipped from struggle were hidden beneath layers of leaves. Once, an inquisitive traveler had uncovered a mass grave near the tree, skeletons piled like driftwood, hands still reaching upward, as if grasping for freedom. The air there smelled of iron and rot, a heaviness that pressed against the chest. Even the birds and animals seemed altered. Crows cawed with unnatural rhythm, forming circles above the tree, wings blackened with tar and ash. Wolves skirted the edges of the forest, their eyes reflecting human anguish. Rats burrowed into the remains of the fallen, gnawing at bones that still carried the echo of suffering. Every living creature was a witness, feeding on the death that saturated the soil. The hanging tree was not a passive object. Travelers swore that it moved subtly, its branches twisting in ways that should have been impossible, guiding ropes toward the sky, curling them like fingers around invisible necks. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, reaching across paths, and sometimes a figure seemed to hang where no rope existed. Madness took root in those who lingered too long, visions of the condemned rising from the leaf litter to whisper curses, to drag the mind into despair. Even the town avoided speaking its name aloud. Parents taught children to pray before walking near the fields that led to the forest, and even merchants rerouted carts to avoid the cursed path. The hanging tree became a legend of fear, a reminder that death could wait silently in the trees, that crime, sin, or mere misfortune could lead to an unforgiving end. Yet the forest claimed indiscriminately. One autumn, a nobleman's horse bolted, dragging him across the mossy floor, snapping his neck on a gnarled root. His body swung from the oldest branch as if awaiting judgment, his gilded boots blackened with mud and rot. A poor farmer's child who wandered too close during play was never found. Only his cries echoed faintly in the wind for days. The hanging tree did not distinguish between the guilty or innocent. It existed beyond morality, beyond mercy, as a sentinel of dread. Time passed in slow, suffocating cycles. Winter brought frost, snow hiding the corpses. Spring brought decay, rot, and vermin. Summer brought flies and unbearable stench. Autumn brought rustling leaves that seemed to murmur with the voices of the damned. The forest was alive in its own way, a living monument of terror, feeding on fear and memory alike. And still, the hanging tree stood, blackened and ancient, its limbs heavy with the weight of centuries. Rope after rope swayed in the wind, and crows perched silently among the branches. Even when the wind was still, a faint creaking could be heard, the sound of bones shifting, bodies hanging, the eternal echo of those condemned to swing forever. Those who dared walk near the forest sometimes returned changed, pale and silent, haunted by visions of twisted limbs, hollow eyes, and the cold, inexorable judgment of the hanging tree. Others did not return at all, swallowed by shadow or madness, leaving only whispers that spread through the village like a disease. Beware the forest, beware the tree. It watches, it waits. The hanging tree was more than a punishment. It was a lesson carved into the very soil and timber of the world, a place where the living met death, where justice and horror intertwined, and where the memory of terror was so heavy that it clung to the trees, the ground, the air itself. It was and always would be the forest of the condemned.